Afternoon, and thank you very much for being here. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge a few very important guests. Denise Pelche, traumatic brain injury survivor and an ATV helmet advocate. I think, could you just give a wave? Where are you? Oh, you're behind me. Right behind. Okay. Oh, I thought you were going to be sitting in the audience. Okay. All right. Brent Hodgson, president of the Alberta Off-Highway Vehicle Association. And Laura Nelson, Executive Director of the Alberta Farm Safety Centre. There you are. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Today, I introduced for first reading Bill 36, an act to enhance off-highway vehicle safety. It is our government's approach to addressing a significant safety issue among drivers and riders of off-highway vehicles, or OHVs. The more common term for these types of vehicles are ATVs, snowmobiles, and dirt bikes. First of all, I would like to state clearly that our government knows that ATVs and other off-highway vehicles are a part of everyday life for many Albertans, and we respect that. People have been riding off-highway vehicles for decades in Alberta for recreation and for work. For example, we know that ATVs are used every day for farming and ranching work across the province, and I want to reassure the farming and ranching community that the amendments for OHV helmets that we are proposing will not apply to farming and ranching activity. But as I noted, there is a significant public safety issue, and we are proposing some legislative amendments to address it. Right now in Alberta, there's no law requiring anyone of any age to put on a helmet when they're out riding an OHV. Every year, on average, 19 people in Alberta die from injuries sustained while riding an OHV. Head injuries account for a significant percentage of those fatalities, and the vast majority of those cases, the injured person was not wearing a helmet. Furthermore, Alberta emergency rooms receive nearly 6,000 emergency room visits every year that are related to OHVs. Many of these visits involve injuries to children. We've all heard stories about kids suffering injuries while riding OHVs, and again, far too often, they were not wearing helmets. So we wanted to do something about that to reduce the number of injuries and fatalities and preserving at the same time the best aspects of Alberta's OHV community. I want to say that Alberta is currently the only province that does not have this legislation. For years, Albertans have been asking their government to do more to keep Albertans safe on OHVs. The bill we introduced today was informed by a consultation we conducted in September of this year with off-highway vehicle users, with the general public and key stakeholders. If the bill passes the House, it will make helmet use mandatory for anyone in Alberta operating an OHV on public land. Well, our government recommends that anyone riding on an OHV in any place and for any purpose should wear a helmet. The helmet requirement will only apply to people riding on public land, and it does not include private land or First Nation and Métis settlement lands. And again, it will not apply to anyone doing farming and ranching work. If Bill 36 passes, the new law requiring helmets for OHV users would go into effect in May of 2017, and it would have accompanying regulations in place by that date. If the bill passes, it would include regulations to allow the Minister of Transportation to grant exemptions for certain groups and activities. For example, those using an OHV with prescribed rollover protection and seatbelts, when properly used, would be exempt from helmet requirements. We would announce any exemptions well in advance of the legislation coming into force. And if the bill passes, we would conduct a public information campaign during spring 2017 to get the word out among OHV users that they need to be wearing helmets if they are driving on public land. Our government believes that making helmets a requirement on public land will help save lives, improve safety, and ensure responsibility when operating off-highway vehicles. I think the media have had an advanced briefing on the bill, so I'll be happy to answer any questions once we've heard from our other valued guests, and I will let them have a chance to have their say.
Thank you, Minister. I now welcome to the podium our next speaker, Denise Peltier, to share her personal experience with you.
Hello. August the 11th, 2001 was the day that I received my lifelong membership in the Traumatic Brain Injury Club. I was critically injured after being thrown off of an all-terrain vehicle, and I wasn't wearing a helmet. I was flown by air ambulance to the Foothills Hospital and rushed in for brain surgery and then put into an induced coma. My family was told at the time I had less than a 5% chance of living an independent life, should I even survive. The 3 weeks I was in a coma were pretty rough. I had septic shock, which was attacking my heart. I had pneumonia, and my intracranial pressure, which is the level of pressure in my brain, which is normally to be in a range of 10 to 15, shot as high as 40. And I also sustained a secondary brain injury, as if the first one wasn't bad enough. After 3 weeks, the doctors held a family conference, and they told my family that given the massive amounts of drugs that I'd been given, there was a strong likelihood my internal organs were going to start to shut down should they continue. So they made the suggestion that I be gradually weaned off of all medication, and they were really honest in saying they didn't know how I'd respond. The best case scenario, they told my family, was that I'd require assisted living the rest of my life, and I'd have a general awareness of my surroundings. The worst case scenario was I'd remain in a vegetative state. They began the process, and everybody was surprised within a couple of days when I opened my eyes, and my family could tell that I was able to recognize who they were. To this day, doctors have no medical explanation as to how I survived. I continued to make really good progress, and soon after I was transferred to the rehabilitation unit. And that was a really trying experience for me, as I had to relearn the basics of walking, talking, and reading, all while battling double vision and having to adjust to the fact that the majority of my sense of smell and taste was now gone. During this time, I also started to become aware of my cognitive deficits, those specifically being my ability to organize my thoughts and my words, to comprehend and to process information, which had all been impacted. Supportive family and friends during this time was really important to me. And I'll never forget how my father, who's with me today, sat beside me in speech therapy, listening as I would read through a grade 2 school book. I stumbled on a lot of those words as I couldn't pronounce them. And with care and compassion and love, he would help me out. I didn't see any good things in life after my traumatic brain injury, and I certainly didn't feel lucky to have survived. I was severely depressed those first few years, and I even contemplated suicide at one point. Accepting and adjusting to a new life and the way that my new brain worked was really difficult. I had to dig really deep to find the inner strength to do so and to never stop believing in myself. And what worked for me was, when I was feeling challenged in my rehabilitation, was to always try and think of it as being temporary and not permanent, as difficult as it was in most days. Today, I live a very full and complete life, one that I embrace and I love. And I don't for a minute take any of it for granted, as I know many people who sustain a traumatic brain injury do not get to the same point where I'm at today. At the beginning of this, I had shared that the doctors had given less than 5% chance that I'd live an independent life, and I'm externally grateful that I was able to fall into that 5%. Well, I wouldn't wish a brain injury on anyone. I wouldn't change my experience for having one for anything, as it's brought me many great gifts. And one of those gifts is I now feel that it's very important for me to advocate for safety so that others don't go through what I went through. Studies have shown that over half of all brain injuries are preventable. And so I've made it my mission to share information and resources and tips with others on simple things that can be done to prevent themselves from becoming part of those statistics. And I share these resources on my website, as well as on social media, and when I speak in public. Last year, I even wrote a children's book, and it's called Emma's Skiing Adventure. And it's a story about a little girl who goes skiing, and she has a very typical day that unfortunately ends with an accident. And she learns the important message of how being safe doesn't have to come at the expense of having fun, and the importance of wearing a helmet. And this book encourages adults, grandparents, and parents to start having those conversations with their children at a young age on the importance of being safe. Today marks a very important day in Alberta, and I feel honored to have been invited to be part of it. I wholeheartedly support this bill. And to me, I feel it's a very strong step in the right direction in keeping all Albertans who choose to ride off-road vehicles safe. This bill moves Alberta one step closer to being on par with all the other provinces that currently offer legislation for off-road usage. And it really pleases me to see how our government places a high degree of value on our health, our safety, our well-being, and our quality of life. I'd like to thank the Honourable Minister of Transportation, Brian Mason, and the entire review committee who came to the conclusion that the lives of Albertans matter. Wouldn't it be nice if there were no traumatic brain injury-related deaths or injuries in the 2007 riding season? I've learned a lot of lessons in my journey since my injury, one being that our brain is a lot like an egg. It can crack really easily. And take it from me, you don't ever want yours to get scrambled. In hearing my story today, it's my hope that everyone walks away with a reminder to always put safety first, because accidents can last. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Our next speaker is the president of the Alberta Off-Highway Vehicle Association, which represents thousands of off-highway vehicle users across the province. I welcome to the podium Brent Hodgson.
Good afternoon. We've been advocating for, Alberta Off-Highway is very supportive of this legislation. We've been advocating for this for more than 8 years. We feel every off-highway vehicle should have a mandatory, should have a helmet, and side-by-sides with seat belts. We think manufacturers' recommendations on vehicles should be followed. That's the very minimum that we support. We represent about 122,000 registered users. We believe there's a machine population of around 165,000 in the province. And we also offer training, the Alberta Off-Highway, through a program with the Ride with Respect and with Minister Mason's department. In the last 5 years, we've trained over 50,000 students in school. We have a school program. We go deliver free education to school, a handout, and part of that is always ride with your safety gear, with your helmet, with goggles. That's part of what we mandate. It's a very good program that we've been delivering with the government for a number of years. So, and really like to thank the government for really support this legislation, and thanks to Minister Mason.
Thank you, Brent. Our final speaker comes to us from Raymond. Lauren Nelson is the Executive Director of the Farm Safety Centre, which advocates for safe agricultural practices.
It's good to be here. Today for the Farm Safety Centre, our president is shipping barley, and so he asked me to take his place and make a few remarks. But today for us is not about political parties or platforms or positions. It's about people and what's in their best interest. A bit of maybe historical background. Many years ago, a group of farmers and ranchers began efforts to organize and build an organization, and their efforts were born of a desire to help things go well for their families and friends and neighbors in rural Alberta. Today, the Farm Safety Centre has teams that travel throughout Alberta, and they reach hundreds of rural and remote locations each year. Small groups of individuals are encouraged to carefully consider the consequences of their safety choices. In those presentations, stories are shared and commitments are made. Commitments like receive rider training and wear a helmet every time when our presentations are ATV specific. Over the years, more than 500,000 Albertans have had opportunity to speak to members of our team about their heartbreaks, much like Denise has done today. Our team members regularly hear of close calls, near misses, and personal tragedies. And as we were listening, and you and the media were listening today to lots of numbers and statistics and incident reports, sometimes we need to remember that every one of those numbers is a person, and every person is important. And their well-being has ripples that impact families and communities and our entire province. Helmets reduce the risks associated with ATV use, and the Farm Safety Centre supports the creation of helmet legislation, as we believe it will bring additional encouragement to wear a helmet every time, which I think is a very accepted best practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. We now open the floor to questions before going to the phone lines. Sure.
My question's for the minister. I'm from the Edmonton Journal. Do you think that this legislation goes far enough to help reduce the number of injuries and deaths? Why not make it mandatory for people in any land and with any occupation to wear a helmet when using an off-road vehicle?
It's a very good question. And obviously, one of the options we considered was to make a much more comprehensive piece of legislation that covered all of those things. I think there's two reasons. First of all, there's a great deal of difficulty in enforcing legislation like this on people's private land. That enforcement difficulty is meant that I think most provinces don't have legislation that applies there. So that was the reason for that. I think with respect to exemptions for farm and ranch workers in particular case, I think one of the things that we realized during the debate on Bill 6 was the need to consult carefully and proceed slowly when it comes to our agricultural community, our rural part. And so there is a working group that is looking at changes to the occupational health and safety legislation, and they will be consulting with agricultural producer organizations and so on with respect to this and other matters. As you know, when we did pass Bill 6, then there was a change in terms of the role of occupational health and safety with respect to farms and ranches. So we've left it there. I think what we are trying to do is to take a first step that will not only provide significant improvements in the actual physical safety of thousands and thousands of users, but which will also set a really good example, because education is a very important component here. You just can't force people to do everything you want just by passing legislation. You need to make sure that they understand why it's important to wear a helmet, regardless of whether they're working on a farm, a ranch, a trap line, or they're just out for some fun on a Sunday afternoon with their family. And so there's an important component there that we are going to be pursuing as well. And there's going to be a good educational campaign in May when the legislation comes into force, because that's usually the month. Often the May long weekend is when most people get out for the first time, and so we'll be out there in an educational way as well. We need to be working with schools, and we need to be working with advocates that we have, heard from today as well, to get the message out that safety is critical, and that if you're on an ATV, no matter what you're doing, no matter what your age or what kind of land you're on, you should wear a proper safety helmet.
Sorry, just a
Sure.
quick follow-up. You mentioned the working group that would look at
Yeah.
regulations for OH&S.
Yes.
Is there any timeline that you're looking at in terms of when you might have recommendations for that?
No, that doesn't, it's a technical working group under the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. And they've been working on this and many other related issues for many months. I'm not aware, although I think we'd probably get you that information as to when they're going to be concluding their work. Okay, thank you.
Right, if there's no further questions from the floor, we'll go to the phone lines next. Operator, can you take the next question?
Your next question comes from Kevin Berger with Town and Country News. Your line is open.
Okay, someone actually asked my question before, but so I'll ask a new question. I'm hearing a couple of times now about how this is a first step. I'm just wondering what else. I'm just wondering what's this? Is there a theoretical second step that Alberta could be taking to align ourselves with other provinces? Is there something we're just not doing right now? Or?
Well, different provinces have different components to their legislation. Some regulate in areas that we're not planning to regulate on. There's nothing specific that we have in mind. Quite clearly, the occupational health and safety piece is another piece that needs to be considered. That's outside the scope of my ministry. And so we'll wait and see what those consultations produce.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
You mentioned the difficulty of enforcement. I guess, do you have, or can you give us an idea of what enforcement for this could look like?
Sure. And we have all kinds of people from, for example, Environment and Parks, Agriculture and Forestry that are out on the land. So, you know, in terms, we don't think there's going to be a need for any additional enforcement, at least at this point. Let's see, the penalty, the fine will be $155, including administration fees. So this is basically the same kind of helmet that motorcycles are required to wear on public roadways, and that's basically how we're going to enforce it. We're probably going to consider a soft enforcement approach for the introduction, where people will be given a courtesy ticket as an educational means, rather than just start fining people right off the bat. So we need to introduce it in a way that people understand why it's necessary, that it's a good thing, and that by complying with this law and using a helmet even when it's not covered by the legislation, they're protecting themselves, and they're certainly protecting their children as well.
Any further questions? All right, thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Do you want to maybe get up here for a minute?